All right, we are going to cover some subject matter on sex and gender stratification in this video. Um, so let's just jump right into it. Hopefully, all right. So the first thing that we want to do is start to think about what do we mean by sex. Okay, now some of this material that we're going to cover today is actually found in the chapter on sex and society. I think it's sex and sexuality, and we're just going to look at a couple of terms to illustrate this from that chapter. And the first is what do we mean in our field in sociology when we say sex? Biological distinction between females and males. Now, this is some traditional historical language relative to what we mean by sex. There's a lot of things that have occurred, new science, cultural shift around what we mean by sex and gender. And you have a video that you're going to be watching this week that's going to illustrate some of that too. That things are changing. The science around sex, biological sex, is changing. Uh, Maybe I should rephrase that. Not that the science has changed; it's that we've discovered and are understanding more about what sex means with humans and in society. So there's that biological side of this where new interpretations and new understandings of sex based on biology. And then we've got the other end of the equation here, so to speak, the other end of the equation where we have gender. And gender is more so what the focus of the chapter on gender stratification is about. In that, gender is defined as personal traits and social positions that members of a society attach to being female or male. Now, historically, we've had a tendency to look at sex as a determinant of gender. That if you were male, then it meant you were this way. You had these personal traits and these social positions that you occupied. Or if you're female, then it meant this. And, um, pretty rigid understanding, rigid lines about sex and gender in society. Now, again, I think it's safe to say the last 10, particularly last 10 years, the science and um, more of the change in norms and acceptance, and that acceptance might be using that loosely here, about sexuality and sexual orientation. Culture is changing, and it has changed. Norms have changed. Law has changed in varying degrees in the last 10 years, 15 years or so, particularly in the United States. So we're going to look at some topics that I feel are relevant in us better understanding what we mean by gender and what we mean by social position. And we're going to look at some research around this. So it's not just a matter of what I think that this is or should be. Let's look at some of the data on this. So to kind of put this in context, again, this is more of how they interact with one another. How gender defines, where's my hand at? As gender defines sex, and as sex influences our interpretation of gender. So, the more educated and the more attention to detail that you have on these terms, you may be more inclined to use the term sex to describe biology and use gender to describe that social construct, expectations, guidelines, and expectations around being male or female. Now, I will point out, and I'm aware of this, and this is where the sciences have new discoveries and culture has shifted, that we're talking exclusively either males or females. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Society right now is wrestling with what it means to be trans. And you could bring in sexuality and sexual orientation. It's kind of hard to talk about sex and gender without considering that. But largely, we're going to focus on interpretations of gender and then looking at gender stratification in society. So, put this in context of what we've been talking about in chapter 1 and 2 around social institutions, micro society, or micro level in terms of individuals, and how all of this is kind of tied together. And let's think about how sex and gender is influenced by culture, by influenced by social institutions. And we actually are going to look at a few, not all of these areas, but we're going to look at some data and some research around education, around the economy and work, and maybe dabble a little bit into a couple of other items here in a separate video, maybe. So, the first thing I want to do is focus on education, and that relates to what we're doing. So, might find this interesting. So, one of the things that we want to explore again, here's that term stereotype, right? A generalization about a category of people. So, for example, if you're male, what are you or and how are you geared or pushed into a certain area of work? Is there a connection between the kind of work that people do, the kind of education or fields of study that they have by male and by female? So you can think about it that way, but also do our families, do we as individuals feel society pushes us to go into this area of study or go in this area of work? Is it socially acceptable for women to be mechanics? Well, of course, women can be mechanics. Why aren't there more female mechanics? Some of it's got to do with cultural expectations. And sometimes that can be something of a barrier for males or females going into certain aspects of the workforce. Okay. So we're going to look at some of that um, as some examples. So what you're looking at here is data. It's a few years old now, but it generally still is applying to what we're thinking about here. You're looking at data about female undergraduates by major, and we're looking at health, education, and social work. And let me make my laser pointer available. So over time here, this line right here, this is the 50-50 split. So 50% up above this line would be females, and below this line would be males. So across majors, males were more likely to be going to school basically going to college from 1970 to 1980. Across majors, women are more likely to be going to college now. There are more women that are pursuing their undergraduate degree than men in 2024. Okay. And even though this data doesn't go all the way up to there, the trend is clear, and I've seen this with other data. I just don't have it in this particular slide. But what I want you to focus on are these areas of study. Women are more likely to be undergraduates in the health professions, whether it's social work. Well, not just health professions, actually includes, if you look down here at the bottom, health administration, pre-med, pharmacy, and physical therapy. So these are all separate. So there's a group of professions in the health professions category. And then we see social work and then education and psychology. I mean, these are above 75% of all majors in the United States. Over 75% of them are women in these areas of study. So why is it that more women are going to go into these fields of study than men? What does that got to do? So it comes back to this notion of gender roles. Okay. You might remember the chapter on groups and organizations. I'm sorry, the chapter on social interaction in everyday life. And I kind of remind you about this. Let me show you something here. I've got something new that I have here. Let me show you this. So let me scoot over. So we've got, you might remember this, where we have status is a social position that you occupy. Hopefully you can see that well enough, right? Is it focusing enough on it? It's a little bit blurry. Let's see if I can get it better focus. It should come into clear focus. There we go. Oh, a little bit. So we have status, a social position that you occupy, and then we have a role, right? Where we have expected behaviors. And so the question is, are there certain social positions that are exclusive to by gender and sex, mechanics? Are there expected behaviors by sex and gender? So if women are not supposed to do this, then what's the likelihood that they go into that field of study? Hopefully move this a little bit, maybe you can see it. Try it again. Hold on a second. Now let's so you can see this. They need to do that, right? There we go. That's a little bit better. Hey, made it work. So just a reminder about that, right? Status, social position that you occupy, role, expected behaviors, and then how are we, generally catered into or funneled into what we're supposed to be? How does culture influence that? So moving on, we'll look at another area of study. This is art, communications, and languages. And again, you can see women are more likely to be in these fields of study. Okay. Moving forward, business. This is interesting. So historically, up until early 2000s, men were more likely to be the predominant majors in that field. Women surpassed that for a brief period of time, and now they're a little bit lower likelihood of being in business majors compared to males. Okay, so you can start thinking about that. Why is that the case? Computer science and engineering. Men are much more likely to be in this field of study than women are. You probably have heard of STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, and math, and efforts to get more women in those fields of study. So if you've not thought about this yet, what's going on here is this history in our culture of, well, women are supposed to do this and men are supposed to do this. Women are supposed to think this and men are supposed to think this way. Now, you as an individual may not, go by that, and you may not be a reflection of what the culture over time has indicated or what it suggests. But it still might be what the way culture is to some extent. I mean, the data doesn't lie about this, particular area subject matter. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at, again, education, look at income, look at a couple of other things, and it starts to paint a bit of a picture. Now, things have changed. Absolutely, they've changed. Let's see, I think, yeah, this is a good example of how it's changed. So women are more likely to be in biology now than men are. And of course, you could see the change over time. Still, this is saying that men are more likely to be found in the physical sciences, which is, for example, physics, chemistry, geology, and astronomy. Men more science, women are more liberal arts, social studies, education. That's what this data is. It's changed. In some regards, it has changed over time. So I'm going to move through a couple of slides here. These are the same data. It's 2007. This is, I think, 2009. And then this is the most recent in your textbook. Now we're looking at educational achievement by race and also by gender. So we're bringing in some other categories here. Remember, when we look at inequality and stratification, we're really going to be focusing on education, educational attainment, income status, race and gender. Race and gender. Okay, those are the major ones. And the location matters too, as illustrated in the last chapter when we looked at states compared to other states. Now, these are all social factors. This is not about what the individual has done or might do. It's social factors, not about the individual. It's about categories. We've been talking about the importance of categories and stereotypes. Okay? So, an interesting thing to point out, you may have already realized this, that women surpass men in every one of these categories. So non-Hispanic whites are more likely to graduate from high school. They're also more likely to get 4 or more years of college. There's also something here about race, which we'll talk a little bit more about next chapter, that non-Hispanic whites have more educational attainment than Black Americans and Hispanic Americans. And that's whether it's high school or college. But again, women are surpassing men in all of these categories. Okay? Women are more likely to go on and get education than men are. And that's something that changed. We looked at that a second ago. Let me go back and show you. That's something that we started to see the change across majors in the mid 1980s, actually, in college. Now, this slide that we're just looking at is also considering high school. Now, it's not a huge change, although that's pretty big for African American females, okay, that difference. Now we're going to look at average income, and I'm going to scroll through a couple of slides here. These are, again, I'll try to look at it, over a series of years to show you how it persists over time. But this is the most recent that's in your book. If what we're looking at now is education by gender and also median earnings, okay? So let me see if I can add something here. Let me turn on the pen. So some things to point out. We're going up the educational ladder here. It goes from lower attainment up to higher attainment. And something I want to show you that it takes women this tier here before it's higher than men at this tier. Okay? Something you also might note, and you see this here. You've heard that women make 75 cents to every dollar that a man makes. That's kind of what we're talking about. You can see the difference here. And there's no category where women are higher than men in all of these. Men are higher in terms of amount of education and income. They score higher than women do in all those categories, in each individual category. All right. So I was going to try to turn on my eraser. How do I do that? Here it is. Let me erase. Oh, nope, didn't erase. There we go. So now a couple of questions here. What do we not know by looking at this table? What do we not know? By looking at this particular table, we don't know what the area of study is, although I just showed you some of those averages. Okay. We also don't know what the job is. And we can look at that. I can't remember if I have that in this slide or a different one. Okay. So one of the points I'm trying to make here is keep asking questions. So yeah, this data is good for what it tells us, but we need more information to better understand it. Okay. I think the last set of slides I'm going to show you for this video is jobs with the highest concentrations of women. Now, some of these are almost 100% occupied by women. And what I'd like to draw to your attention is if you see any trend in the types of jobs that these are. Assistant, assistant, assistant. And you got to think medical assistant to who? Male or female? Likely a male. Okay? And I know that to be the case with this data. You see education, you see health professions, a lot of health professions in here, lower level health professions, okay? All right, so we're going to stop right there for this video, and thank you for your undivided attention, and I'll be back soon.